In this new world, Aeternum Hatchet build guide will focus on the hatchet, which works both as a melee and ranged weapon. It scales with both strength and dexterity, but leans more towards strength at a ratio of about 2 to 1. Since you're not likely to max out any attribute until later on in the game, it's best to prioritize strength if you're planning to use the hatchet early on. That said, if you want to pair it with a dexterity-based weapon, just keep in mind the hatchet won't be as strong compared to if you pair it with a strength weapon due to the scaling difference. By far the best aspect of the hatchet is its ability to be thrown and used in melee, and with a new lock-on system in New World Aeternum, you should have no problem hitting enemies or players with thrown hatchets as they approach, and then meleeing them when they finally arrive. This makes it extremely versatile and useful in just about any situation. If you're going for a primarily ranged build with a bow or a musket, the hatchet would work as a solid secondary weapon. It's not a bad backup, but it might not be as strong as an option like the rapier or spear, which naturally scale better with dexterity. Still, the hatchet can do the job if you prefer. Its light attacks deal 100% damage, heavy attacks hit for 120%, and charged heavies hit for 160%. However, landing heavy attacks can be tricky due to the hatchet's short range and small hitbox. You'll need to be really close to your target, and because of its angled slash, it can sometimes miss smaller enemies, especially if you're not aiming slightly to the right. The pros of this weapon type are that it can be used at range and melee, it can increase move speed with Berserk, can prevent death with Defy Death, and has very fast attack speed. The cons are it has very short reach for a melee weapon, melee skills can be hard to use, and it has little to no AoE. Looking at the hatchet skill trees in New World Aeternum, you have the Berserker skill tree and Throwing skill tree. The Berserker skill tree focuses on fast-paced melee combat with a hatchet that lets you close in on enemies quickly, while the Throwing skill tree obviously focuses on throwing the hatchet to deal damage and debuff enemies at range. The Berserker skill tree revolves around landing multiple hits in quick succession. The hatchet swings faster than heavier weapons like the Great Axe or Warhammer, meaning you'll do less damage per hit but attack more frequently. This works well for questing since you can often get in 2 hits before dodging, whereas slower weapons may only allow for 1 hit before needing to defend. The faster rhythm of combat in PvE suits the hatchet's playstyle, making it a strong melee option. In the Berserker skill tree, the first skill is the Feral Rush ability, which lets you leap forward and perform a 2-hit spin attack, but its short range can be tricky. If you activate it at max distance, the second hit might not connect, and sometimes it misses entirely depending on your ping. It's great for hitting the back of an enemy or player, especially in PvP where you can upgrade it to root your opponent. However, it's difficult to land consistently in the middle of combat, so it's not a go-to ability for every situation. Progressing this skill line allows you to increase Feral Rush's damage and inflict root, immobilizing the enemy for a few seconds. Berserk is a fantastic ability, boosting your damage, run speed when upgraded, and more. It has a relatively long cooldown, which only starts once the ability expires, so you can't use it constantly. Still, it's incredibly effective when active and significantly increases your damage output. You can also pair this with a taunt gem to taunt all enemies near you when activating this skill. Keep in mind though that Berserk only applies to the hatchet and swapping to another weapon won't carry over the buff. Progressing this skill line allows you to gain lifesteal when attacking while Berserk is active, removing crowd control debuffs attached to you, as well as making you unstaggerable. Raging Torrent is another interesting skill. It unleashes 4 rapid attacks faster than your normal light attacks, but it's easy to get interrupted while performing it. You have to be really close to the enemy, which raises the chances of getting hit mid-combo. It's highly effective when you manage to pull it off, but it can be risky. Progressing this skill line increases Raging Torrent's damage and grants you haste. Most passives in the Berserker tree enhance multiple hits or deal bonus damage when the enemy's health is low, keeping in the theme of rapid repetitive strikes. Defy Death is the one standout passive. This capstone allows you to survive at 0 health once every 60 seconds. When you get a hit that would kill you, you'll instead become immortal for half a second before regaining 500 plus half your health. This can be a game changer in questing, especially for new players, and it's a lifesaver in PvP, literally. Moving on to the Throwing skill tree. The skills in this tree focus on range damage while inflicting the enemy with debuffs. The first ability is Rending Throw. This reduces the target's protection and deals damage, making it really effective against heavily armored opponents, whether you're facing another player, a boss, or an elite monster. Opening with this throw can debuff your target, allowing you to follow up with more damage as they close in. Since it's a ranged attack, you can hit them as they move toward you, which is handy, and it's easy to land when using lock-on. Progressing this skill line allows you to extend the debuff duration as well as increase the skill's damage. One thing to keep in mind is that thrown weapons have a bit of a learning curve when aiming manually. There's a slight delay between when you activate the ability and when the weapon actually leaves your hand, and the projectiles have a small arc. It's not a huge arc, but each thrown ability has a slightly different trajectory, so you'll need some practice to get the timing and aim down if you throw manually, but there's really no need to with hatchets, so I recommend just using the lock-on. Social Distancing is another great ability. It deals solid damage and makes you dodge backwards. The best part is that it gives you an extra dodge without using stamina, so you can use it point blank to avoid attacks, especially if you're running low on stamina or dodging a lot already. This makes it perfect for a build that relies heavily on dodging. Even if you're in heavy armor and don't dodge as often, it's still a useful tool for repositioning while slowing down your target, which is especially important in PvP to keep enemies from escaping or catching up to you. Progressing this skill grants you haste when hitting an enemy with an active debuff, as well as inflicting root on them. Infected Throw is a debuff ability that reduces your target's healing and damage output by inflicting them with a disease debuff. It's great for softening up a player or enemy before they close the gap, limiting their ability to recover or deal full damage when they engage you. If you can land a few of these throws before switching to melee, you'll have an advantage going into close combat. Progressing this skill line allows you to prolong the debuff's duration. Most of the passives in this tree focus on enhancing your throws. Some let you aim and throw manually at the cost of stamina, while others reduce cooldowns or increase damage. The theme here is all about making your throwing abilities more powerful. The capstone, Persistent Hindrance, increases the duration of debuffs applied by your thrown attacks. While useful, it's not as strong as Defy Death, since the debuffs mostly shine in PvP with the exception of Ren. Overall, Defy Death tends to have more impact, especially in situations where staying alive is crucial, so it's generally the better choice. When pairing the hatchet with another weapon, you'll likely want to go something like the Warhammer, Great Axe, Great Sword, or possibly a ranged dexterity weapon like a bow or musket. These options work well because the hatchet is great for softening up a target with its throwing abilities before you close in from melee combat. As for the hatchet's melee capabilities, they're a bit underwhelming due to its small hitboxes. If you find yourself outnumbered, the narrow reach makes it hard to hit multiple enemies at once. Weapons like the Great Axe, Warhammer, or even Great Sword or Sword have wider horizontal swings, making them more effective for crowd control. The hatchet's melee swings are more suited for a single target, which can be useful in some PvP scenarios, but if you're up against more than one player or enemy, you might struggle. That said, pairing the hatchet with a spear or rapier can also work well. You could debuff enemies with your hatchet throws as they approach and soften them up, then switch to a spear or rapier to deal melee damage. In this case, the hatchet isn't your primary damage dealer, but it's used to apply debuffs, which can set you up for stronger hits with your secondary weapon. When it comes to armor, it depends on your secondary weapon and playstyle. If you're using a Great Axe, Warhammer, or Great Sword, you'll likely want medium or heavy armor for better defense. However, if you're using a ranged weapon or spear and rely more on dodging, light or medium armor is a good option to maintain mobility. Ultimately, the main reason to use the hatchet in New World Aeternum, especially after testing it thoroughly, is its ability to debuff and deal damage at range while also being able to melee. While it can deal damage in certain situations like hunting wolves or in a pinch one-on-one, it's not the go-to weapon for maximizing damage in questing or in dungeons. Wider weapons with broader hitboxes are much better for handling groups of enemies. The hatchet excels at applying debuffs and then allowing you to follow up with a different weapon, making it especially effective against tough one-off enemies. So that wraps up our New World Aeternum Hatchet build guide. I hope you guys found this useful. We will have other weapon guides and build guides, so stay tuned for those, and a beginner guide as well. Will you guys be using the hatchet at launch? Are you going to be using some other weapon? How do you feel about the hatchet? Have you played New World in a long time? Are you coming back? Let me know in the comments below.